This
All
is
right.
just
Hello, everybody. Hope you're all
a morning
having
show
a great week. I hope y'all
across
are
your valley.
enjoying this time with one another
Listen up.
and getting to know one another and getting to absorb information and just, kind of have a blast and connect. I think that's a challenge sometimes we have in the world sometimes is connecting with one another and making that a priority. So, my name is Jonathan. I'm going to introduce myself. So, originally, I'm from California. I grew up in a part of California called San Diego. So, I grew up by the, not too far from the border. We're a border city, but I lived in the northern part of San Diego. I've After growing up in San Diego, I moved to Texas and I kind of did a ministry program which brought me to living in Australia. I lived in a part of Australia in Sydney called Blacktown. So I worked with a congregation out there in Blacktown, and then I also helped out a little bit in Gosford. Since doing all of that, when I came back to the States, so I have a bachelor's degree from Lubbock Christian University. So I have a degree in mission work. Then I went to Texas Tech to get my master's degree. So I have a master's degree in counseling, and I'm working on my PhD in counseling. So I'm a licensed professional counselor. So that's my full-time job. So I do a lot of telehealth counseling with people in the state of Texas. I also work with kids in the foster care system. So you know, in a way, I kind of play a role of like a pseudo parent. I also work with a consulting firm. And a few years ago, I actually started my own publishing company. Now, part of the reason I started this publishing company and why I started writing is, and this kind of directed me to even the career path of becoming a counselor, is I recognize that there's people out there who who really need to see Jesus, but they're not necessarily gonna their first experience with Jesus. Um, it may not be in the church. It might not come from walking into a building. And so I wanted to be able to reach out globally. I wanted to reach out beyond just my community to let people see Jesus in one way or another. Because the Great Commission says, go out in the world and preach the gospel. But sometimes the approaches in the church or in ministry, they lend themselves to more of a, we expect people to come in, or maybe we go to a campus and we have like all these flyers, you're going to go to hell or do you want to go to heaven? Approaches like that are sometimes very impersonal or sometimes really push people away. But also, I might not ever run into you in my life, so in your life. So I started this publishing company to address, spiritual concepts or mental health concepts through writing, and it's expanded to where we have multiple authors, we have multiple books out, and so each author kind of puts a little bit of themselves in those books, and it's just been growing. And so that's kind of what I do. I've uh, been to I've done some music with y'all before, so I was on the mixtape not too long ago that kind of had everybody on it. So I do have a background in hip hop. I started rapping when I was about 12 or 13 in junior high. My first rap name was G Sweet, which was pretty cool at the time. I think I still like that name. Now I'm MC Still from Psalms 46:10, which says, "Be still and know that I am God." So that's kind of where that. A lot of people don't know that that's where I kind of got the name from. I also, try to b-boy. I can really only do like the worm and a windmill, but it's tougher now that I'm in my 30s. Everything kind of aches when I try. Also, popping and locking. Sorry, that was terrible. So I do have a hip hop background. I've done some music over the years. I might showcase some of it at the back end of this video if y'all are good. So, and this video will be available on my Irene Bros Publishing webpage. So this is for you guys, but also this could be a benefit for people out in the world. Because again, that's my approach is global and impacting the community. So I was tasked with coming to y'all and talking to y'all a little bit about burnout and kind of the challenge between when you have a passion and you're trying to pursue it and you're trying to grow it, but that passion runs into conflict with exhaustion. So I'm going to explain briefly some concepts for you guys. It'll start, I'm going to start explaining way over there and then slowly get to it. And you'll really want to know these concepts. So one of the things to always have in your mind is this concept that words mean things. Sometimes, like when I use the word gaslighting. I hate that word. There's certain words people say all the time that just get on my nerves. Like capping or gaslighting, all these. They get on my nerves because, one, if you overuse a word, it gets on my nerves. Two, sometimes when we use words, we get further and further away from the meaning. So we just kind of use it and throw it in every conversation. Like the word dude. It's a term sometimes we may use, for anything, right? And so even though it does have a meaning, the more we use that term, it gets further and further away from its original meaning, which sometimes is okay because that just shows how language grows, right? However, when we're talking about specific things that may be, like terms like anxiety or depression or whatever, the more we use those things to describe something that's further and further away from what it actually is, it can water down the word. Or sometimes what it can do is I may misrepresent my closeness to it. You know what I mean? Like the term gaslighting is like, sometimes the term is used so loosely, like anybody could do it. Or small inconvenience can mean I'm gaslighting somebody. You know what I mean? So sometimes it gets so far away from what it really is. And so with that, I want you to have that on one side. So words mean things. So the first thing is, so I'm explaining a concept called secondary trauma. So first dairy trauma. So we'll call that PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a diagnosis, but the concept is easier to explain that way. So post-traumatic stress disorder might be, I felt like I was going to die from a situation. So somebody gets shot at, maybe I'm getting shot at, or I'm next to somebody and they get shot at. That could be PTSD. So it's a very traumatic experience, and it turns into symptoms later, but that's kind of more like the first kind of degree of trauma exposure, okay? That's what I'm trying to kind of explain, is my proximity to the incident is very close. Secondary trauma is similar to like what somebody who works as a paramedic or somebody who works in a hospital. Maybe they see somebody come in and they've been, maybe they get a patient that's had a very violent injury. So secondary trauma is, while I didn't see the person get shot, I'm exposed to the incident because I'm taking care of that person. And so secondary trauma is them experiencing this over time, and it can create some problems. So it can sometimes look like PTSD, but it's not. I'm not sitting in the moment where somebody with PTSD has. I'm seeing the after effect. So that's an example of secondary trauma. Another example might be that's easier, like for me working with foster care kids, is I can kind of see moments where like the kids have kind of like what we call a trauma response. And so really I can see the after effect of their trauma. So sometimes that can be a secondary trauma, but it more than likely needs to be a little more extreme than that. But there are cases I would say where I probably have. Or like me working in the jail, having worked in the jail system, I would say some secondary trauma from dealing with clients there or dealing with residents there. The next step below that is sometimes what we call vicarious trauma. So for me, working as a counselor, I hear stories from different clients, or even again working with foster care kids. So I become exposed to a lot of information. And I'm kind of giving you all this extra information to give you an idea where some of the concepts of burnout come from. So a lot of it is, or the conversation around burnout, some of it actually comes from this line of thinking I'm talking about. So vicarious trauma, sometimes they meld secondary and vicarious trauma, but for right now we're going to keep them separate because most people believe they're separate, but some people combine it. That's probably more information than you need to know, but you need to know sometimes they do combine them. But vicarious trauma might be I hear some of my client stories, or I can read like when I used to work in the jail at a jail, as a case manager, maybe I read a client's profile, and I'm exposed to information that is really ugly. That's vicarious trauma. Is while I maybe am not like actively sitting in the trauma or feeling like the direct result, I have awareness of something that's can be overwhelming. So that's vicarious trauma. And I give you all of that information to lead up to the concept burnout and one other concept, which is we call compassion fatigue. Now, compassion fatigue, we're going to start there. Because sometimes compassion fatigue and burnout, sometimes we combine them, but you're better off separating the two. So back to secondary trauma. So if I work as an ambulance employee, and I'm seeing all of these horrendous things, and especially if you get bored or you look at, what happened to, medical professionals during COVID, that's actually a very prime example of it. Compassion fatigue is when I'm exposed to so much of this stuff that I'm seeing, I'm feeling less compassionate towards the people I'm helping. It feels like a job versus I feel like I'm helping. So like with me working with foster care kids, it could be like, it's another Friday, it's another Saturday. Or for me, when I see my clients, it's another another case of depression I'm hearing, right? And I'm not necessarily quote unquote burnt out, but my energy towards helping that person becomes dampened, which is a concern. And it's not something that people often think about is compassion fatigue. Is when I don't feel the drop. Like one of the things why I like working with foster care kids is at the end of the day, I feel like I helped somebody who needed help, who it's very obvious why they need help, right? Compassion fatigue will steal that. So it's now I could be working with foster care kids or McDonald's. I don't feel any different about it. That's what compassion fatigue does. It takes the joy I get out of doing the thing I do to help people. And there's certain career paths or there's certain populations you may work with where that's it can be deadly to you because now it could be a sunny day, but it looks grayer. That's what compassion fatigue does. But there's certain fields or populations where that's likely to happen. If I work, me having worked with kids and adults in the jail system in the past, I'm going to likely see that person again. Or I'm going to see another person with the same issue coming in. Or me working with clients in the counseling realm is, I've heard this story from 30 other different people, right? But this is my full-time job. I'm not getting healed people. So compassion fatigue in the work I do becomes very deadly for me. And that may seem extreme, but compassion fatigue, if my days seem gray, they're not going to be brighter when I clock out of work. And this is a challenge sometimes in ministry, is you spend a lot of time trying to help people. But Jesus went to the cross for the people that put him literally on the cross in that moment. Imagine if he had compassion fatigue there. If he had compassion fatigue there, he's not saying, God forgive them for they know not what they do. He's going to be like, meh. You know, they're just going to start cussing and doing all the other stuff anyways. Jesus probably had an idea. You know what? After I come back, I resurrect, these same people are going to do the same simple things they're doing right now. That's the attitude of compassion fatigue, which can lead to burnout. But sometimes, and this is, I'm not giving any data for it, but like compassion fatigue can sometimes precede burnout or grow out of burnout, which, especially for those of you that maybe are in music, that are in the hip hop community, well, that's how you see some of these rappers with substance misuse problems. Obviously, sometimes they have trauma. They start not having compassion towards their work. There's no joy left in their music. Like, they're doing it, but there's no passion in it. And that's what compassion fatigue does, is the positive energy that I'm receiving back, that I normally would receive back, compassion fatigue says, even if I'm getting it back, I'm resistant to it. It's not making a difference. It's not making a dent. But if I've already signed up for it, then it's no different than working at McDonald's. And that's compassion fatigue. And it's very obvious sometimes, like in the medical world, because they see stuff. All they're doing is staying a problem. People are going to die. So compassion fatigue can be very deadly and disruptive in the work they do, because all they're doing is staying off an inevitable. It's not, it can get better, but it's only going to get so much better, so that compassion fatigue can make that work miserable. Absolutely miserable. And I can very easily go inside myself when my life and my work are miserable. And that's just in that field. But that's where you see sometimes these, these artists struggling with substance misuse, struggling with suicide. A component of that is going to be compassion fatigue, not just for the thing I'm doing, but compassion towards myself. And that's where burnout becomes very important to consider. We talked about compassion fatigue and secondary trauma, and a lot of this conversation on compassion fatigue and burnout, a lot of it comes from these folks who worked in, like police officers or EMTs. That's where the conversation of burnout and compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma, a lot of it comes from those working in these fields where problems are very obvious. But it's not, it doesn't just exist in those, it exists in others. It's just, it's a lot more obvious. The reason for it is more obvious, right? So burnout, it's not just I'm tired. Burnout, if you imagine, is like, compassion fatigue can be similar, so you can use this analogy. It's like a snake. Depression, similarly, too. Is compassion fatigue, it's like a snake. Burnout, it can be like a snake. But not like a poisonous snake, like a constrictor. The power of a constrictor is it's in its muscles. Those muscles are really only useful once they've constricted enough to where your strength is no longer useful. Like I said, with burnout or even compassion fatigue, it's just like that snake constricting around you. Is the challenge becomes is like once your strength is no longer useful, you become or beneficial or strong enough to push back. Well, my resistance to other things becomes a problem. So burnout, it can occur when, maybe I'm working a job, right? And maybe I feel like, my hours, I'm at my limit. Where burnout really sits is when I go past it. When I go past that limit. Where not only do I just feel tired, but I just feel so tired that I won't take time off. Or if I take time off, I'm just sitting at the house. Is my resistance to to that feeling of burnout. I'm just living in it. And I may not even feel like, at one point maybe I feel burnt out. The next I feel empty. And it's really that emptiness where the burnout lives. So maybe, if you're working in music, it's just another song. You did a song yesterday. You did another one today. And it's a cycle that continues and continues, but I don't actually have the energy to stop. There was a point where I did, but it's after that point that I'm at the burnout. Or maybe I'm trying to, it lends itself to relationships. Sometimes relationships have burnout. There's a point where maybe we could have re-steered the ship, and now I don't have the energy to push back anymore. I don't have the energy to fight anymore. See, where it's different from compassion fatigue is the thing I care for, I lose energy. Burnout, I lose energy to continue to do the thing I'm doing, actually still doing it. Now, sometimes it may show up at some point, maybe I just stop. But I stop everything, So, like, if it's a job, my burnout, more than likely, it's going to look like I'm still doing the job, but, like, I'm kind of dead on the inside. But I may not even recognize it. There's a point where I recognize I'm dead on the inside, and then the other side of it is where it's so monotonous. It's just like this, the paint on this wall, it's dry. It's just there. It's just an is. I don't care, dislike, or anything for it. I'm just living. But I'm not thriving. I'm not enjoying. I'm not even disliking. I just flat. Nothing. And that's one of the most dangerous things is it's this word called apathy. Apathy, like whenever I'm working with clients, especially clients who maybe are in relationships, apathy is so poisonous. It goes back to the book of Revelation. Jesus talks about being lukewarm. Being lukewarm, you're neither hot or cold. There's just no substance to it. And it's really hard to move apathy. And apathy can occur in both compassion fatigue and in burnout. And it's very hard to deal with apathy because it's just like I said with the snake analogy, is at that point, I don't even want to fight the snake anymore. I've just kind of succumbed to the situation. Not that I've made peace, I've succumbed to it. I just let it win. And so that's kind of what burnout and compassion fatigue are. And it's very important to know both of those two because, if you're working in ministry or if you're in music or whatever you're passionate about, passions can be very easily end up in the area of compassion fatigue or burnout. But also there's other aspects of my life. If I feel burnout or compassion fatigue at my job, that issue doesn't exist on an island. I guarantee you some of that burnout and compassion fatigue is going to bleed into other aspects of your life. Back to that verse in Revelation, the problem with the church being lukewarm is they're not just lukewarm when they're in fellowshipping with one another, that means you're being lukewarm out in the world. That means you're being lukewarm in how you evangelize. You're being lukewarm in your preaching and in your prayers. You get what I'm saying? Is there's no energy to it. It's neither hot, it's neither cold. That's how poisonous being apathetic can be. Is it's not just occurring in one aspect of my life. It'll bleed into my relationships. It'll bleed into my passions. And the downside of when it gets into my passions is that my passions become apathetic. The thing I like for some people, music is an escape. But imagine if that escape turns into a prison. Now the sun outside doesn't seem so bright. The thing I love is now, it's not even the thing I hate, it's the thing I'm meh. It's just an is. And that can be a very dangerous place to be. And so, I'm going to give you guys some stuff to think about as it relates to how do I deal with it? How do I recognize it? And how do I move forward? Now, so with that in mind, so something you want to consider, like, as it relates to burnout and things like that, is part of managing it. I have to identify it before it becomes a problem. And, same thing with compassion fatigue, or just other things in life sometimes, is I have to be aware, when am I, if you imagine, like, this sword being relatively flat, right? Is, if things are pretty consistent in my life, it's when things start to deviate and shift that maybe I need to be aware. Maybe, sometimes the seasons can affect it, relationships can affect shifts, so, those can sometimes be easier to identify if I'm willing to look at them. But sometimes that's hard to do. So with burnout or compassion fatigue, I got to identify, okay, when am I no longer really enjoying this? Am I starting to drag my feet? But also something I got to also consider, are there other things in my life that I'm not keeping in check? Kind of like working out. There's people that go to the gym all the time that, maybe don't look super fit, right? But they still go. And that's because the value of the working out isn't necessarily always the obvious result that everybody thinks about getting. Is there's that discipline. Is health-wise, within their body, they're more likely to be better. Maybe on the outside, it may not look like that, but they will likely be better because they are working out all the time versus maybe if they were, maybe their body looked a little healthier, but they weren't. Is that working out, that discipline, that consistency plays a lot. And that goes to, one of the things that Paul the Apostle says is to preach the word, be ready in season and out of season. Just like the sword, the scriptures, the sword of the Spirit, right? Well, if I'm praying and I'm reading my Bible every day, I'm probably in a position, I'm going to be more ready to deal with spiritual war if I do it like it's a discipline. See, burnout kills discipline. It's going to make you maybe want to go to the gym less, pray less, maybe shrink your prayers, maybe read a little less scripture. And for those of you in music or in the hip-hop world, maybe I stop going to certain events that I love. Or maybe I find myself leaving an event a little earlier, and not because I'm tired, but I'm not feeling myself as much. But if I'm ready in season and out of season, if I stay ready, I don't got to get ready. The goal is to keep problems with burnout is the goal is to try and keep it small, because the moment that problem becomes big, now you're having a, it's just like I said with the snake, is once it's constricted enough, it's survival or death. I don't get to be creative. I don't get to come up with some creative things to deal with it. Is now everything becomes streamlined. It's going to go one way or the other. Kind of that's the thing, is once burnout or compassion fatigue really set in, it limits some options, because I'm not going to have the energy to do creative things. I'm just going to have to almost soldier through something. That's kind of like if I have burnout and I'm in the music industry, I'm going to have to soldier through the burnout to get on the other side of it. I'm going to have to make drastic decisions, but I'm not going to have as much energy to draw on, and that's the challenge. So my call for you guys, identify what you can be disciplined at, what you can be consistent with, what can help you to stay ready. Because when it comes, you have to make decisions. When it gets overwhelming, when that snake is really constricting, you're going to make tough decisions. You're going to really actively lean on support, and you're going to have to force yourself to do the work. There's no other way around it. And sometimes that's a challenge, like with the clients I work with, is when a problem gets really severe, like an injury, you're kind of doing what they call symptom reduction. Like, so if I have a leg injury, we're going to do pain management and inflammation management. But if I stretch, if I'm taking my vitamins, if I'm eating healthy, I lower the chance of me getting that same leg injury. But the moment that injury, once I cross that threshold, we're managing the other stuff. We're in the negative, we're in the red. And it'll be a while before I can get to that point where it's preventative. And that's kind of my message. So remember, be ready in season and out of season. And I want to leave you with a couple scriptures. So Romans 12:9, it says, "Let love be genuine, hate what is evil, and cling to what is good." And that's me signing off. I'm going to leave some contact stuff up for Irene Bros. So, if you guys ever want to reach out. I'm also going to leave Instagram for one of our authors. He's an MC. His name is AC the Bard. So check out his music. Those of you that may do music may want to link up with him. Cool dude. He does a lot of our children's books. Good righteous man. So wish you all the best. And again, like Romans 12:9, let love be genuine. Keep it authentic. Clean. You got to fight to keep something dead. And that's where that discipline comes in. May the Lord bless you and keep you. You must be going insane. You hopped on the wrong train, struggling to maintain. Now you got followers trying to jack your veins. They ain't repping your name, but they sound the same. Carbon copies of an illicit game. It's a shame, really, God gives us talents, and y'all's are wasted chasing what can't be caught. Don't misuse what you got, spitting lies like a Glock. I ain't mad, this is just the top. But before you line the chalk, you're on the Titanic, about to leave the docks. This should be a shock to your tempo. Be different, not just the outline of a stencil with a pencil like a spell out your end. But instead this shot in the darker sand. I got you in my sights, a shark ready to bite. For those living in the dark and those in the light. Got my hand on the trigger to pierce your brain. In a world gone insane, it can be tough to maintain. I got you in my sights, a shark ready to bite. For those living in the dark and those in the light. Got my hand on the trigger to pierce your brain. In a world gone insane, it can be. I got you in my sights.